welcome or welcome back to Ruby Says So. So today's project is going to be a tote bag, and I'm using pattern pieces, so pieces that I've cut out from a pattern that I purchased on Etsy. So I think it's really good to support other creators because they've created this pattern for us to use, and so it's great to support that so we can continue using these patterns. So I bought it on Etsy for $6.50 from a page called Sewing Shed Designs, and it's the library tote bag. Go ahead and have a look. I've put the link in the description. Now, when you buy the pattern, it does come with a written tutorial. It's extremely easy to follow. It's written out very well, and it comes with images to show you exactly what they're talking about. So if you prefer to follow a written tutorial with images, absolutely go for it. Follow that. Use that pattern and use that tutorial. So I'm only pulling the pattern, so the sizing of my fabric and the pieces that are needed from that pattern that I've purchased. And so for my tutorial, I'm only going to be doing it in my way. I'm not following the written tutorial from the pattern. So feel free to follow along with myself if this is what you're happy to do and what you're comfortable with. But if you would also prefer to follow the written tutorial, that is perfectly fine. Or you can look at both and you can see where I do things one way, they do things another way, and you can make it so it's easy for yourself. So have a look at both options and go for it. So what I've done is I've already pre-cut my pieces as per the pattern. So what we've got is a tote bag with two different outer fabrics. We have the main body of the bag. I've chosen donuts, and it's in a thicker cotton duck fabric, so it's a little bit thicker than your normal cotton, a little bit more durable. And the base of the bag is also a cotton duck or a cotton drill, so again nice and thick. So that's my contrasting fabric there. I'm going to show you how to put those together. For my lining, I have used just plain cotton poplin. So I've got two pieces of my cotton poplin for my lining, and then we're going to make handles. And I have cut two pieces of the cotton drill or duck in the donuts to be my handles. So go ahead and cut your pattern pieces out. So like I said, following the link to the pattern, you can measure this out yourself if you don't want to purchase a pattern. So what I normally do if I'm measuring it out myself is I take something like an A4 size notebook and I measure that, and then I add 4 centimeters or something onto each side for width, and then add on for length as well. So if you wanted to do that, you can. Okay, grab your fabric and come over to the ironing board and place your fabric right side down. You want to fold it over long ways so your edges come together. Try and get it as even as possible, and we're going to give it a press. So we're not running the iron along it the way you would be ironing a shirt. You're just putting it down and holding it in place for a few seconds and pressing it. If you're running the iron over it in all directions, you can stretch your fabric. So this is why we just place our iron down and we're pressing. Now you want to open that up, and those long edges need to meet the crease in the middle. So you want to fold that over and have that long edge meet in the middle there. And we're going to press this as well. And look, don't worry if it's not completely perfect, and just watch your fingers, because if you've got a steam iron, you might start steaming your fingers and it can be quite painful. So just be careful of that. but just holding it in place and gently pressing that. Once you've done that, you need to do it to the other side as well. So just repeat that on the other side of the fabric, bringing those edges together to meet in the middle. Give that a press. Just holding it in place. Don't worry if it looks like it's falling open, it will go back into place. If you've got a steam iron, you can let some steam out because that will create more of a crease on the edge if you're worried about it falling open. So once we've done that, we want to fold it again so that our outside edges come together. We're going to fold in that middle and meet our outside edges together. And here we have a handle. So folding it like this gives it a couple of layers of fabric. So it just kind of reinforces the handle. You can put some fusible interfacing inside it if you want. So interfacing is just something that gives it a bit of extra strength. It also stops it stretching. You find interfacing inside lots of garments, like in the collars of shirts and things like that, where you don't want it to stretch out of shape. But you don't have to. And for this tote bag, we're not going to do that. So do this on both. Now we're going to sew our strap. So you want to just pop it in under the needle with about 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and just line it up with something either on the edge of your foot or on the plate so that you can maintain that straight line. You want to make sure that you're not going off the edge when you're sewing, so don't make your margin too small. So I'm going to pop mine there, and like always, I'm going to put my needle down, and I'm going to start with my back stitch. So go forward a little bit, then go back a little bit, and that's securing your thread in place. And then you want to go forward nice and slowly. Now don't rush. There is time to do this. And if you feel like you are okay with sewing this, or you've done it before, then you can feel free to fast forward this bit if you like. So just go in your own speed, and I'll meet you at the end because we're just sewing in a straight line. But taking your time, you want to go close to the edge of the fabric at the end, but not off. Then we stop and we do another back stitch, which is going to secure that in place. So back, then forward, and we have our strap. So do this on both of your straps, and I'll meet you back at the table. Now that I have done my handles, I'm just going to set them aside for a moment. We're going to come back to that because what I'd like to do now is put my outer fabric pieces together. So what we need to do is take the top part of your outer bag and then take your base piece as well. And so we pop those right sides together, so facing together, and just line up where you want your base to be. So it should line up equal to the bottom of the top piece of your bag. And then we're just going to pin that. Now just make sure that if you've got a directional fabric, which is basically a fabric where all the pattern goes in one direction, make sure that's facing the right way up. So for example, if you've got little people, you want all your people standing the right way up. You don't want them upside down. So just pay attention to your fabric. But with my donuts, it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to fuss too much about upside down donuts. So I'm just going to pin this base on to the top part. You can use clips as well. It's just whatever you're comfortable with. Now I've already pinned my other one, so that's ready as well. So what we want to do with this one is we will sew straight across there. However, before we go to the machine, I just want to try and minimize how many times I'm going back and forth to the machine. So I'm going to set this one aside for a minute, and then we're going to have a look at our lining, because we can take both of these to the machine and do them one after the other. So again, if you've got a directional fabric, make sure it's in the right direction. So place your pieces right sides together. What we want to do is we're going to pin it so that we can sew from the top corner all the way down, leaving a gap so that we can bag out, and then commence sewing again all the way back up. And then we leave the top bit open because that's going to be the opening of our lining for the bag. So pop some pins in there. I'm only going to put a couple just so that I can show you, but put as many as you think you need to make it secure. And like I often do, I like to mark where I want to leave my gap. So I'm going to put a pin there, and then I'm going to put a pin over here. So that's going to be my gap. So when I sew, I'm going to come to here, do a back stitch, then commence sewing here, starting with a back stitch back up. So go ahead and pin your fabric, and I'll meet you over at the machine. Okay, so I hope you have both your outer and lining. So if you've only bought one bit, go and grab the other bit so you've got both parts of the project. So what we want to do is we're going to attach our base to the top part, and we're just going to do a stitch straight down the edge. I'm using my normal presser foot, and I'm doing a 1.5 seam allowance, which in inches is 5/8, or roughly 5/8. So like I've said in previous tutorials, we want to start with our needle down. We're going to take our pins out as we go, so make sure you've got your handy pin cushion, and we're going to just line it up with something. Like when you look at your machine, you'll see little grooves, and you can line it up there so that you're going in a straight line. Sometimes you can use sticky tape. You can pop a little bit of sticky tape or something there so that you can line it up with the tape, and then you know you're always going in a straight line. So I'm just going to eyeball this with one of the little grooves on my machine. So starting with our back stitch as we always do, securing our thread. We're going to sew. Now you just go at the speed that is comfortable for you. I'm just going to speed this up a little bit so that we don't have to have you sit here watching me for half an hour. Here we go, almost at the end. All right, so I start doing my back stitch at about a 1/4 inch to the end, and then sew off the edge. There we go. So we have now attached one base. So do that on both pieces. Once you've sewn it on both pieces, open it up and press your seam down towards the base. Okay, so you see how that goes towards the base? Because we're going to do a top stitch on this. Now you can finger press this. I'll move my machine back a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. You can just finger press along, or you can take it over to your ironing board and give it a little press. It's up to you. Once you've done that, we're going to do a top stitch just on the base part, along straight along there. I would say a couple of millimeters in. So doing a top stitch will hold that seam down, so it stops it from bunching up in your bag. And it gives it a nice finish as well when you see a top stitch going along there. So I'll show you what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go probably there. So I am stitching about 2 millimeters from the crease on the base part of your bag. So needle in, and I'm just going to go slowly with this. Because there's no rush, but I just want to make it as straight as I can so it just looks nice. Now don't worry if you're not getting it exactly 2 millimeters the whole way along. No one's really going to notice because it's only a very small bit of fabric between the top and base that you will see. Speed that up a little bit. Okay, do my back stitch. And there you can see, a little bit wonky, but that's okay. But you can see what I mean. I've done a top stitch all the way along. So you want to do that on both pieces of your outer fabric. Okay, so go ahead and attach your base to your top and then do your top stitch along the base. And then we'll do our lining. Now that you've done your outer, let's sew our lining. So remembering the top of your lining is the part that we didn't pin. That's going to be the opening. So starting on one side, and we're going to keep our seam allowances the same. So a 1.5 centimetre or 5/8 of an inch. Starting with our back stitch and taking your pins out as you go. Now I'm not pulling this through, I'm just allowing it to be guided so it goes in a straight line. Now if you're reading the written tutorial, you'll notice that they only sew to a certain point because they're actually going to cut squares out of each corner to make a boxed corner. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do the boxed corner in the way I normally do, which I find to be a lot quicker. So just go ahead, keep sewing as you normally would, and I'll show you the box corners shortly. So remember, when you turn your fabric, you keep your needle down, you lift your foot up so that you can maneuver your fabric around without it moving away from the line of stitching. And now I'm going to just sew to where I want my gap to be so that I can bag it out. Remove my pin about there, do a back stitch. And then I'm going to move it over and restart. There, removing my pin. So starting with our back stitch. Feel free to fast forward at any point if you are comfortable with what we're doing. There's no need to sit here and watch the entire process of this stitching if you already know it. And you guys just take your time with it. I'm speeding it up so that you're not sitting here for hours. Okay, there we go. That's our lining. So let's pop back over the table and we'll start our next section. You're probably wondering why I have joined my lining pieces right sides together, but I haven't joined my outer. There's a reason for that, and it's because we're going to attach our handles, and it's much easier to attach your handles when these pieces are still in two separate pieces. So pop one piece in front of you and grab one of your handles, and we want to always make sure that it's nice and straight, and then we bend it up and pop our two pieces flat, and that means that you get a nice flat handle. So when you're carrying it, you don't want it twisted. Now, to measure it up, I normally measure, where's my little ruler? Oh, I'm kind of eyeballing it because I've made quite a few tote bags, so I think I want it to sit about there. So I put it, yes, 12, so I'm going to go 12 centimetres. So the inside of my handle is 12 centimetres, Not sure if you can see that. Let me move that over. So 12 centimeters, and the inside of my handle starts there. So I'm going to pop a pin in there to hold that in place. And then on the other side as well, so 12 centimeters. So you want the inside of your strap to meet that 12 centimeter mark. I'm not sure what that is in inches. You'll need to just have a look and convert it to whatever's closest. There we go. So then we now need to do that on the other side as well. There we go. So what we're going to do is you just need to go to the machine, and we're going to just do a stitch across the top of our straps. Okay, let's do our handles. So take your first piece. Now with our seam allowance on this one, we don't want a 1.5 because when we turn the bag the right way round, we're going to do a top stitch around it. We don't want to see the stitching from the handles poking out the top of our bag. So what I normally do for this is I line up the side of my foot with the top of the bag. So I just place that there at the edge of my strap. Put my needle down. Now, leaving my needle in, I'm just going my pin in. I'm just going to move it forward a couple just to hold it in place. Now I'm going to take my pin out, and I'm going to do reinforcement stitches. So basically I'm going to go forward, back and forward, and that'll just stitch it in nice and strongly, because the last thing you need is your straps breaking. So go forward to the edge of your strap. Now you can back stitch that the whole way. Just make sure you're following along the top of your bag nice and even with your foot, and then forward again. There we go. You don't need to worry about starting with a back stitch for this one because you've now pretty much reinforced it with the back and forth. So needle up, and then we're going to do the same thing on the next handle. So pop your foot down, needle in, move it forward a couple of stitches before you move your pin out, and now it's held in place. So forward, I'm going to go backwards, and now forwards. Do that on the other side too, and then we'll join our outer fabrics together. Now that you have attached your handles, I've clipped off most of my threads because I just find it easier to work without all threads sticking up all over the place. So like I said, we're going to do like we did with our lining. So you want to take your outer fabrics right sides together. I tend to line up my straps, give it a bit of a shake, and that looks pretty good. They're pretty even. So lying those flat, and we're going to pin all the way around and back up, leaving an opening at the top. Okay, I have pinned all the way around. One thing I also did was I made sure that my seam for the where the base joins is lined up as well on both sides, because you want that nice and even. So line that up, and if it means that you have the top bit of fabric comes up tiny little bit, don't worry about that, because nobody's going to see it. It's more important that you have your seams together on the base of the bag here, where people are going to see that. Okay, so let's sew. Now, like I said with the lining, feel free to fast forward if you feel comfortable doing this. But if you want to watch, stick around. Happy for you to watch this bit as well. I just want you to be comfortable with what you're doing. So starting with our needle in, pin out. Going to do a back stitch like always. I want you to go slow. I'm just speeding it up so you don't have to watch me for half an hour. And just holding it in place, not pulling it through the machine, just guiding it so it goes in a straight line. I like to slow it down a little bit when I go over seams. That's just my personal preference, because I like to make sure there's not going to be anything that kind of shocks the machine. You don't want to hit something by mistake. There shouldn't be anything in there for you to hit if you've removed your pins. But just nice and gently over that join, because it's a bit thicker. Coming down to the corner, and with my, so like I said with my lining, I'm doing a 1.5 seam allowance, or 5/8 of an inch. So leave your needle in, turn your work, foot down, and then straight across, no gap. Here we are. Needle down, foot up, turn the work, foot back down. And coming up to my join. So like I said, I'm slowing it down a little bit, taking my pin out, guiding it over nice and gently. There we go. Perfect. And we're almost at the top. So I've taken my last pin out. I'm holding my fabric in place so it doesn't move about. Keep your fingers out of the way. About 1/4 of an inch to the top, you can stop and start your back stitch. And then go forward. There we go. Done. There we have. So we can see our opening. We are joined all the way around, no gap. Let's go back over to the table. And this is where we're going to show you how to do your boxed corner. Okay, so what we want to do before we do a boxed corner, we want to take off some of the bulk from our seam. So it may not look like much, but once you have your lining and your outer together, you don't want to feel a really thick seam inside your tote bag. So to do this, just grab your sharp fabric scissors. If you've got a rotary cutter and prefer to use that, you can. However, I like to just use my scissors when it comes to a soft fabric bag like this. So I'm going to trim, and I'm going to take off half of the amount. Trim my thread out of the way. So I'm going to just trim it down to half of that amount. I need a little bit of extra force over that join. Just be careful, go slow, because you don't want to have your scissors go in the wrong direction. There we go. So I've taken off that. I'm going to do the same with the base of it as well. Don't stress if it's not exactly half, because the point is just taking off the bulk. There we go, over that little bit. There we go. Now I want you to do the same with your lining. However, when you get to the base, don't trim the bulk on that. Just leave that. Just do your sides. And I'll show you the reason for that once we've bagged out and when we go to close up the hole. So just trim your sides. Now we're going to make boxed corners. In the tutorial, the written tutorial for your pattern that you have purchased, they measure 1.5 inch. I think it's about a 1.5 inch. And they make a square of about 1.5 inches. Okay. And they cut that out. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you another way. You can do this way. If you want to do this way and cut little squares out of your bag, your lining and your outer, go ahead and do that, but make sure you're following the instructions in the tutorial. For us, we're going to do it differently. Turn your work upside down. Pop your hand inside your bag and pop your finger into the corner and just grab that. And you'll have a triangle. So what I like to do is push my seams so they're facing the same direction. So that seam is going over to the right and the base of the bag seam is also going over to the right. So that seam will sit flat. Join your little seams up so you can feel it in your fingers where both of those seams join evenly. So just give your bag a little shake, keeping it nice and flat. And we're going to do a 1.5 inch. Okay, so you can grab clips. Oh, I'm going to reach for my pin cushion. So I'm going to do a pin. I'm going to pop a pin in. So it's 1.5 inch straight across. So popping my pin in there. Pinning that in place. That's 1.5. Okay, so do that again with the other side. Pop your hand in. You want to make sure that your seams are going the same way all the way across your work. So put your finger in, and now for this side you'll have to press your seam in the other direction. The reason is so when you hold it flat like that, you can see that both of those seams are going in the same direction. So just make sure that you haven't twisted it so one falls one way and the other falls the other way. Otherwise it's just going to cause bulk in your bag and it's going to be awkward when we join the gap. Okay, so just do that, press that down. You can feel your seams in your fingers there, and you're going to measure 1.5 inches Put my pin in. There we go. So I have 1.5 inch across. That's going to be the width of the base of my bag. So you've done that on your lining. Pop your lining aside, and we're going to do it on our main fabric as well, our outer fabric. So pop your finger into the corner. You can feel it create a triangle. Flatten your fabric out. You can feel your seam in your fingers that it's lined up. You've got your seams going in the same direction, so mine is falling to the right on this one. And I'm measuring 1.5 inch. And then I'm pinning that in place. So that is 1.5 inch. Then I'm going to flip that over, doing the same thing. So on this side, your seam is falling to the left because when you look at your base, it's going to be nice and flat. So your seam is going in the same direction. So there you are, creating your triangle, feeling for your seam. There's joined up together nicely, measuring 1.5 inches. Pop it in there. There we go. 1.5 inch. Now we're going to go over to the machine and we're going to sew our 4 corners. Rightio. Guys, you're more than halfway through now. How exciting. So you've almost got a finished bag. Once we've done these corners, you're going to actually put both parts together. So you're almost there. Okay, so we're going to be removing our pin as we sew like always, but you're going to just line it up as a guide. So pop in the corner under your foot, put your foot down. The pin is lined up into the middle of my foot in line with where my needle comes down. So I know that I'm going to go across in one straight line, making sure that your seams are flat. So I've already felt for mine, my seams are going the same direction on both sides. So I'm going to put my needle in and then remove my pin. And now we're going to start with a back stitch. And nice and slowly in a straight line across. And then finishing with a back stitch. There we go. You've done one corner. Flip your fabric over. And we're going to do that again. So just making sure our seams are in the same direction, holding that nice and flat. Foot down, needle in line with our pin, removing our pin, back stitch, and then nice and slowly across in one straight line, finishing with a back stitch, needle up, foot up. There we go. So do that with your lining as well, and I'll meet you back over at the table. Right, you've sewn your corners, so we just need to trim straight across. So grabbing your fabric scissors, and I would probably trim about 1/4 inch. You can trim 1/2 inch if you're comfortable with that. It's entirely up to you. But just it helps take the bulk out of the corners when you trim these corners off. So do that with both your outer and your lining. There we go. Now you need to turn your outer fabric the right way round. Put your fingers into the corners. See that? You have a nice boxed base of your bag. You can already see it coming together. That's pretty exciting. Just trim any threads, get them out of the way. Do that on both of your lining and outer. Just makes it easier to work with. It's good to get into the practice of working neatly and tidying as you go. Otherwise, if you're working in piles of stuff or with threads everywhere, it can get confusing. So while you're a beginner, it's good practice to get into a habit of working in a tidy way. But it's your project, it's your life, so you do what's comfortable for you, but that's just my little tidbit. Now, what we want to do, we're going to join our bag together. We're almost done. Guys, this is really exciting. So we're almost done. And it's looking good already. I really like this. So what you want to do is get your lining and you're going to put your outer inside your lining. So make sure your outer is the right way out so you can see the right sides. Leave your lining the inside out. Okay, you'll see why when we bag it out. Now, put your outer inside your lining. Make sure the handles are inside the lining. You don't want your handles sticking out like this. Otherwise, you're going to end up with handles that you won't be able to access. So give it a nice shake. Line up your seams. So you can see there your outer and lining seam. Join that together. Pop in a pin. Hold that in place. And do the same on the other side here too. So see how you've got your outer and lining, your seam, side seams together. And pop in a pin. Okay. What we're going to do now is we're going to pin around. So we're pinning. We've got an opening and we're going to pin all the way around this opening. So we're only pinning our outer fabric to our lining. Okay, you still need to be able to get your hand inside the bag, so don't pin that closed by mistake. So just give it a little bit of a shake, line it up as best you can, and just holding it gently. Try not to pull anything either way so you're stretching your fabric. I like to start with my straps. Just get that there and pop that one in as well. You need more than 2 pins, so be generous with the amount of pins you're using because you don't want your bag moving around while you're sewing and you end up with puckers and folds at the top of your bag. Now, okay. Flip that over And I'm going to do the same with this one. Just lining that up again, make sure that that feels good there. So pinning on the outside where my handles are. There we go. If you have had your side seams, if your side seams were nice and equal on both your lining and outer, you shouldn't have any extra fabric puckering. If you find you do have a little bit of extra fabric, you can ease that just by gently rolling it between your fingers and just really softly letting it kind of fall together naturally and pinning it. And that way it stops you from getting puckers in the top. But mine was equal, so I don't have any need to show you exactly that. We are going to do a project eventually where we will do easing, so I'll show you that when we do it. So anyway, we have pinned around our bag. So let's pop over to the machine and we're going to sew this in place. What I want to do is I'm going to remove a section of my machine, and it makes this smaller. You have this on your machines as well. So whatever attachment you have around your machine, pull that off and set it aside for the moment. The reason for that is because when we sew around our bag, we want to be able to put our bag onto the base of our machine like this. So I'm sliding one side of the bag underneath and lifting the other side over. I'm also going to start on a side seam. So I'm just going to wiggle that around so that I have a side seam of the bag is where I want to start my sewing. I also want to do a 1.5 centimetre or a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on the top. So put your foot down, flatten your work out, make sure that it's nicely situated and nice and soft so that as it sews you can push it through and it will roll around this part of the machine. So starting with our needle in like always, removing our pin and then doing our first forward and back stitch. And then we can start sewing. So you want to just guide your fabric through, keeping that top part of the bag lined up with your 1.5 and removing pins as we go. I'm coming up to the first handle, so I'm going to just make sure that my handle is flat. I can feel that that is nice and flat. So we don't want any twists in our handle. So just nice and flat and very slowly up to the edge of my strap. Now I can take my pin out and I can go over that strap. And you need to do this the whole way round. So nice and slowly. It's not a race, so no going like Fangio. Just nice and slowly so we have good control over our work. I'm going to speed it up a little bit so that it doesn't take as long. But for you guys, just remembering to go slow and flattening your handles out as you go. You can also fast forward this bit as well in the video. If you've already done this before or you're quite comfortable with what you're doing, go ahead and fast forward this little bit and I'll meet you at the end. Now I'm coming up to my side seam, so I'm just slowing it down a little bit so I can go over my side seam with nice control over my work. There we go, and no surprises. The last thing you want when you're sewing is surprises. We don't like surprises in sewing. But if we do get a surprise, we're not going to freak out. We're just going to roll with it. And there's always ways that we can roll with anything that happens. So flattening out my handle. So you want to be turning your work and manipulating it around your machine as you're going. And we're almost back to where we started. And we finish with a back stitch on top of what we started with. So don't worry, you can go over that a couple of times and it just reinforces what you've done. There we go. We've attached those together. So let's go back over to the table and we're going to trim our excess. Okay, so we have our seam around the top of our bag, and so we're just going to trim some of that excess. What you can see on here is where I have sewn my handles, so you can see that there. I want to make sure I'm trimming just above that because I don't want to cut that off. I like the fact that I've reinforced my handle. So not only do I have where I've originally attached it, but I also have this seam now reinforcing that handle. So it's just reinforcing it so that your tote bag remains nice and strong. So when you trim, you want to trim just above that. So for this, I can probably remove half of my seam, so half of the bulk, and I'll be cutting on top, like above that. So let's just do that. So just with your fabric scissors, just be careful you're not cutting into any of your work. So just holding that up so you can see where you can start. I generally start on a bit of an angle. And I just go in gently with the top bit of my scissors there. Now I'm coming up. So like I said, I'm cutting above that stitch. So you do need a little bit of extra strength going over those handles because you are cutting through a couple of layers, like several layers. There we go. And the same with our side seams as well. Now I am holding this in an odd way so that you can see what I'm doing. But if you're more comfortable laying this flat on the table, you can. So to lay it flat, so you can lay it flat like that, and you can see where you need to cut. And you're keeping the rest of the bag out of the way. Coming around to where we started. There we go. There we have our bag, and we've removed the excess. So this is now where we're going to bag out our bag. To do that, the gap in your lining, pop your hand in, grab your bag and gently pull it through. You don't need to be too rough with this. It will come through quite easily because it is just a soft bag. So now we have our outer and our lining. This is where we're going to join that gap in our lining. Before we push the rest of it into the bag, we want to close up our gap. So remember before where I said to you don't trim it down? And this is why. Because I want these two bits of fabric that are already quite thin, these seam allowances, to join together. So I just pop my fingers in the gap on each side and pull it taut, not too hard, you don't want to rip your stitches. And you can see that the fabric naturally folds in on itself and wants to close up. So this will work if you have trimmed that, but I just find it works much easier without having cut those seams. But you guys do whatever you're comfortable with. But now you've joined, so you want to join that up. Now you want to just pop some pins. I'm going to hold that in place. Okay, so I'm going to put a pin where the join is. So that's where I want to start stitching. And then I will also put one on this side of the join on the gap as well. So I know exactly where I want to start and finish stitching. So now we're going to go over to the machine and we're going to do a top stitch, which is called an edge stitch because we're stitching the edge. So that means we want to come in about 1/4 of an inch from that edge and just do a nice stitch the whole way across. I have left the part of the machine that I removed off because we're still going to be doing a top stitch around the top of our bag and we'll need it removed. So for this, I've just left to do an edge stitch. It's okay if you want to put yours back on because it's easier, go ahead, but I have left mine off. So now lining up, I want to start where that pin is, and that's at the edge of my gap. I've lined up 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to put my needle down and remove that pin. And I've lined up 1/4 of an inch where I can see there's 2 little grooves on my presser foot. There's one in the middle and then there's another groove 1/4 of an inch over to the right. So I've lined up the edge of my fabric with that little groove on my presser foot. And that's what I'm going to use as a guide all the way through. So just holding your fabric nice and straight, starting with our back stitch. I like to put my hand through and just help guide it, especially when I'm doing something very small like this. Taking your time. You can forward this if you already know all about it. If you've seen any of my other tutorials where I've done pouches, I have also done this edge stitch. So if you feel comfortable, you can go ahead and fast forward and I'll meet you at the other side. But for the rest of you guys, slowly through, removing your pins. And we're almost at the other side. So I'm just eyeballing where I removed that pin. It's about there. I'm going to do my back stitch to finish that off. There we go. And there we have a nice finished edge. Okay, so what we want to do now is we're going to put our lining into the bag. Give it a bit of a shake. And push your corners in. Now, I like to go around and remove any extra threads that might be sticking up. So just trim those. Don't cut your fabric, but trim as close to the fabric as you can. Trim them off. I think that's it for me. I didn't have too many. What have I got? Something on the side. Oh, that just comes off. That's good. Okay, so what we're going to do to finish our bag is we're going to do a top stitch all the way around our bag, and that just finishes it nicely. It holds our lining down as well, so it doesn't flap about out of our bag, but it just gives it a nice finish. So what we want to do for this is just rolling our fabric a little bit so that we have a nice seam, and then we can pin it in place. So we just want both the lining and the outer to be as even to the top as we can, and going to pin it in place. You can take this to the ironing board and give it a press if you want, if that helps you, you know, get your lining and outer lined up. But you don't have to. You can just finger press at the moment. You don't need too many pins, but just make sure that you have enough to keep it secure. I have a little thread there, so I'm going to snip that and pop my pin. So just giving it a roll, flattening that out. And with your side seam, you might need to give that an extra bit of a roll as well, so that that is nice and flat. So go ahead and do the whole bag all the way around, and I'll meet you back at the machine. So we are now going to do our top stitch around the top of our bag. As you can see, I have pinned mine all the way around, so it's ready. And this is where we also, if you have reattached your part, take it off again, because we want to do the same thing we did when we attached our lining to our bag, where we want to be able to stitch around and maneuver it across that part of our machine. So I like to start at a side seam. So put one side of your bag underneath your machine and the other part over the top. Now we don't need a very thick width around the top. Okay, so you don't need to do your 1.5 seam allowance. I'm going to do the probably from the middle of my foot where the needle is lined up to the edge of my foot, a bit like when I was attaching my straps and I gave myself that small width. So that's what I'm going to do with this too. So I'm lining the edge of my foot up with the edge of my bag. I'm going to put my foot down. There we go. And I'm going to put my needle in. You want to make sure that your handles are out of the way because you don't want to sew a handle over like that. Otherwise it's going to be attached wrong and you'll have to unpick it. So make sure you're moving your handles so they are going up as if you were about to pick your bag up and carry it away. Now my needle is in. I'm going to remove my first pin and start as we always do with our forward and back stitch. Holding it nice and flat and just watching that edge of your foot and the edge of your fabric. Don't watch your needle going up and down. It'll make you dizzy. So just watching where you've lined up your foot to your fabric, and that's your guide. So just taking it through. Pins out as you go. Take your time. I'm going to speed it up a little bit, but just make sure you're pulling the bag through, making sure you're rolling it over this part of your machine, keeping it nice and flat so it goes through nicely. With my side seam, I'm just going to slow it down a little bit as I go over that bump. No surprises. Then I can speed that up a little bit. Keeping your handles flat and out of the way. Take your time over those. And maneuvering your bag as you go, keeping it nice and flat. And we're almost at the end where I have another pin, so I'm going to keep an eye on that. Just keep it nice and flat. Keep my thread out of the way because I'm going to be trimming that off. And then you want to stitch on top of that, a few stitches, back stitch, forward stitch. That is it. Needle up, foot up, remove your work. You've got a bag. You've got a whole bag. Trim your threads. There we go. Let's head back to the table and have a look at our finished item. This is very exciting, guys. You've done so well. I'm really proud of you. Look what you have. You have one finished tote bag with a lining and with a boxed base corner. So that is your standard tote bag. If you've got little ones who are going back to school and need a library bag, this is a really great option for them as well. You can use any fabric you want. You can use cotton fabric like I did with the lining on both the inner and outer. However, especially if you've got little ones going to school who are going to be throwing this all around the place, then going with a thicker cotton drill or a cotton duck on the outside. You can even go into the furnishings department of your fabric store and get a canvas if you like. They've got different types of canvas. There's canvases for inside and canvases for outdoors as well, which are going to be even thicker. So just bearing in mind, you want the bag to be able to be folded up and thrown into the bottom of school bags and things like that. So nothing that's going to be hard to manage. But this is a great starter bag. So that was the library tote bag from Sewing Shed Designs, and I purchased my pattern and tutorial for $6.50 on Etsy. I'm going to put the link for that in the description for the tutorial. And like I said, it's entirely up to you what you would like to do. You can watch my video where I just do it myself without following the tutorial, so you can follow me if you like. But if you prefer a written tutorial, go ahead and follow that as well, or watch both, look at both, see what parts are easy for you or what you prefer to work with. And you this is part of learning, so it's a really good way of mixing and matching tutorials and finishing a project in a way that is comfortable for you, that's easy for you, especially as a beginner. It's really good to look at both options there. But I am very proud of you if you have gotten to the end of this tutorial, and if you've managed to get through a few of my tutorials and you've done them. I'm so proud of you. You are a beginner. You need to give yourself a real good pat on the back for this, because this is no mean feat. So there you go. You've got your tote bag. When you've made them, show me what you've made. Put them in the comments. Like and subscribe and put it in the comments so I can see what you've done. And you can even talk to other people who are commenting as well. Give them tips and tricks. And if I have any other, expert sewers watching my channel and you have any advice for all of us, please also comment. We want to know, we want to learn. So I'm really proud of you. I'm very proud of my bag. I'm going to be using this today. I can't wait. So go ahead and make yourself a library bag. Thank you guys. I'll see you next time. And if you've got any suggestions of anything that you would like to learn, put those in the comments as well, and I'll have a look and see what we can do together. Okay, thanks guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye.